What can a buyer pay when it comes to real estate agent commissions and the different financing types? So there's a lot of conversation right now with the lawsuits and the real estate agent commissions, and the questions that everybody has right now is, how is this going to affect buyers? And of course, how does that affect financing? So I'm going to go over a couple of things for you that we have based on information as of today. So keep in mind, today is April 1st, 2024. This is a fluid situation, of course, and there are things that are going to change here. So we'll update you on this as best as we can as things change. But I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios and let you know how that might impact the buyer, the buyer's agent commission, and the who can pay for what. Okay. So the first scenario is, of course, if the seller is already agreeing to pay the buyer's agent commission in the listing agreement with the seller's agent. So if that happens, then of course nothing changes, right? It's going to be in there. The seller's going to pay for it. It's going to show up on the CD. It's going to be normal. Okay. Now, if there is no buyer's agent commission listed in the listing, then the real estate agent can negotiate that into the sales price. Okay. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky, because if the buyer's agent negotiates the sales commission to be paid by the seller, then that becomes a buyer obligated fee that the seller will pay. And that's going to fall into our interested third party contributions, which is the seller concessions. And we've given you guys a cheat sheet for that as well. But that's how that would be calculated. And based on the buyer's loan and down payment, this is how that's going to kind of break down. The seller is allowed to pay up to 3% of the buyer's closing cost if the down payment is less than 10%. They could pay 6% of the buyer's closing cost if it's between 10 and 24.99%, and 9% of the buyer's closing cost if it's 25% down or more. And of course, on investment properties, the seller can only pay up to 2% of the buyer's closing cost. So if that is the situation, you can negotiate it in the contract. It'll have to be written out, probably somewhere in special provisions. Of course, if this is a Texas contract, that the seller agrees to pay X amount in buyer's agent commission, and that will count towards the interested third party closing costs allowed. Okay, so now if that doesn't happen, and let's say it's zero, but you have an agreement with your buyer that they will pay for the commission to you, that's totally fine. It will go on a CD just like anything else. You do need to let the lender know so that we can account for it in our calculations. So there's a lot of different scenarios that have been discussed recently about how that's going to affect a buyer's cash to close. It can also affect their approval. So for example, if we run an approval for somebody and we expect to have a certain amount of assets in reserves, that's going to reduce the risk of loan and get us an approval. Now, if those reserves go away, we may or may not have the same approval that we did with those reserves. So as soon as you know this is the scenario, please let the lender know that the buyer is going to be paying the real estate agent commissions. We can put it on our estimates and account for those fees, so that way we know that their cash to close is accurate and we have a valid approval based on their assets available. Okay. The next section basically is, or conversation is, how is this going to affect first-time home buyers? So valid question, as a lot of times first-time home buyers it doesn't necessarily have to be a first-time home buyer either. Maybe just a low down payment buyer. Okay. They don't have the funds to be able to pay for the real estate commissions, right? So we need to know what the situation is as soon as possible on the lender side. And from there, we can adjust accordingly. So one of the things that I think is going to have an impact here is going to be down payment assistance programs that we can get access to, so that the buyer has additional funds to close. Those kinds of things will, of course, come into play. Now, on an FHA contract, it doesn't matter, 3.5%, 5%, whatever the situation is. The seller, if it's negotiated in there, can pay up to 6% of the buyer's closing cost. Okay. So now the biggest impact that we're going to have is for veterans. Unfortunately, it specifically states in the VA guidelines that a veteran is not allowed to pay the real estate agent commissions. Okay. So this cannot be paid by the buyer in any way. It can be paid by the seller, and then that's going to again fall into your Closing costs. There is a limit on different things that a lot of people throw out the 4% number for closing costs, but that's not entirely true. Seller can pay closing costs, seller can pay up to a certain number of discount points, and they can pay 4% interested third party contributions. So that is going to have to be used on a VA loan because the buyer cannot, in no circumstance, pay the real estate agent commissions. Okay, so that's how it's all working today. So now there's a lot of questions that we have on the lending side, just as you probably have, how this is all going to play out in the next few months to a year, whenever all this stuff kind of settles out. Where we end up, we don't know. One of the big questions we have right now on the lending side is, will the financial institutions that put together guidelines, will they change the interested third-party contributions? So for example, less than 10% down, you can only get 3% seller credits. Are they going to change that to 6 to allow for real estate commissions to be paid at 3% and still get 3% towards closing costs? Those low down payment loans are the ones that are going to be affected the most when the seller is not paying the buyer's agent's commissions. Okay. So I know that's a lot of information and it is going to change. I hope that helps you answer some of your questions. Please make sure that you're keeping track of the real estate commission, cheat sheet that I've sent to you, or save this video so that you know when you're negotiating your contract for your buyer, how much the seller can pay towards their closing costs. We don't want to get into those situations where there's just not enough money and then somebody's either not getting paid or somebody's coming to closing with more money than they thought or don't have. And so make sure that if you have any questions on that, refer to the cheat sheet that I'm sending out to you guys, as well as call us if you need us. By all means, let us help you structure the contract with the numbers so that you know what you can or cannot do based on lending guidelines and not contract guidelines. So hope that helps. If you have any questions, give us a call, send us a text or an email. We look forward to hearing from you and having the conversation further. Have a good day, guys.